A battered old car crept slowly along a country road, cutting through Minnesota's snow-blanketed fields. It clearly wasn't built for winter travel off the beaten track. Behind the wheel sat Ryan, a 16-year-old boy who wore a grim frown, blinking often as he gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles had gone white. He didn't have a license. His driving experience was limited to a few practice laps in a parking lot, but after his grandfather's teasing, what's there to it? Just press the pedal and turn the wheel. It's an automatic. You don't need a brain surgeon for that, and it's not far. He reluctantly agreed to drive on to the neighbouring settlement. Truly, there was no one else to do it. Next to him, sprawling heavily in the passenger seat, Glenn, Ryan's father, snored drunkenly. In the back, nose buried in a book, sat Janine, Glenn's young wife. You don't choose the day of a funeral. If not for that sombre occasion, the family would never have left their hometown to travel into this God-forsaken wilderness in such weather. A few days ago, Glenn's brother Kenny had frozen to death in the forest. Relatives had gathered from all around to bid farewell. On the first day after the funeral, everyone drank themselves senseless at the parents' house. The next morning, when most had already left, it was decided to continue the wake at the deceased brother's home about 10 miles away. Glenn had downed a few more drinks, shed tears with his father, and then Janine and Ryan had loaded the drunken man into the car. Janine, sober but stubborn, refused to drive. The grandfather's last barb, "What's the matter, not man enough to handle a car?" pushed Ryan into starting the engine. The old car rolled onto the road leading away from the highway toward distant houses. On the third turn, near the old railroad tracks, the grandfather said, waving them off from the porch of the old house, "There's a crooked tree. You won't get lost." The day was leaden and grim. Snow dusted the barren fields, and the low sky looked ready to unleash its fury at any moment. By the time the car halted at the turn off the highway, it was well past noon. Ryan took in the surroundings. Sure, he spotted the crooked tree, but there was no sign of old tracks. Everything lay buried under deep snow, and it would take until spring to guess where they might be. He sighed, took out his phone. The signal was nearly gone, but the map managed to load. Ryan placed a marker and put the phone aside. In that brief time, the sky darkened further and snow began to fall. The tyres found a hidden rut beneath the snow, dropping the car a bit lower, and with scraping protests, it veered toward a patch of woods. Snowdrifts loomed in white hills, bare black tree trunks advanced and retreated from the roadside. The snowfall grew heavier, and a wind rose, howling across the plains. To Ryan, it felt like they'd been wandering through endless whiteness forever. At times the rut deepened and hidden stones scraped against the undercarriage. Visibility worsened. Snow plastered itself to the windshield until the wipers jammed, frozen in icy heaps. Outside, the wind raged and howled, whipping snow into frenzied eddies. "Ryan, what's going on?" "Are we almost there?" Janine finally called from the back seat, her voice drawn out in weary hopelessness. "They said it was only about 10 miles. What about your navigator?" Ryan halted the car and picked up his phone. By now, it felt as though they'd been driving an eternity, yet the village was nowhere in sight. The map marker hadn't budged from where they'd left the highway. The phone had frozen, unresponsive, no signal. The weather had turned monstrous. The wind moaned, the trees groaned, their blackened limbs clawing at a gloomy leaden sky. Ryan sighed. "I have no idea. We should have seen it by now." "Damn it! Why did Glenn have to get so wasted?" he muttered. "Don't you talk like that about your father," Janine snapped, then softened. "He's in mourning." Ryan snorted, tugged on his hat and mittens. "I need to clean the windshield." He stepped out. The cold slapped his cheeks and wormed into his collar. A city kid through and through, Ryan hated this desolate wilderness. He circled the car, opened the trunk and pulled out a scraper and brush. Early on, Ryan had hated Janine with a passion. She was only 9 years older than he was, and she appeared in their home less than a year after his mother's death. He resented her presence, waging a silent war. Glenn, always working, never noticed the quiet hostility simmering under his own roof. But one day Ryan brought home a sick puppy. He begged his father to help, and Glenn refused outright. Then Janine took the puppy's side, speaking up for that trembling scrap of life. That night, a thread of mutual understanding wove between them. Ryan never saw her as a mother, but he stopped battling her. Sometimes a single glance was enough for them to come to wordless agreement. Janine stepped out as well, taking in the bleak panorama. The wind made her squint. Ryan fussed with the frozen wipers, working the rubber blades free. He gave her a look that said, "Don't interfere." She understood and moved a bit farther down the road instead. To the left rose wooded hills, to the right stretched an empty field dissolving into a distant tree line veiled by blowing snow. No sign of railroad tracks, everything was buried. Janine shivered and started to head back when she caught a flicker of movement in a hollow by the roadside. Something dark against the white. She narrowed her eyes, raising a hand to shield them from wind and snow. A child's face peeked out from behind a snowdrift, dark hair dusted in flakes, eyes black and empty. Janine's heart stuttered. A child? Out here in the freezing cold, no clothes? She dashed down into the snowy dip, sinking to her knees. Around her, only the roar of the wind and muffled clunks from Ryan's work at the car. Reaching for the child, Janine suddenly sensed something terribly wrong. The child's head was twisted unnaturally. Its eyes were pits of merciless blackness. Before Janine could recoil, it bit into her wrist, teeth sinking deep. A lance of cold pain shot up her arm. Janine screamed, grabbed at the creature's snowy matted hair and flung it away. It snarled, a sound that shattered her reality. Mind reeling, she stumbled back to the car. Ryan had just closed the trunk and turned to find Janine, trembling, clutching her wrist. "Ryan, it bit me," she gasped, voice ragged. "There's a child, a dead child." She trembled, struggling to breathe, clutching at the bite. Ryan rushed over, alarmed, but there was no wound, no mark at all. Janine whirled around, only disturbed snow where she had struggled, nothing else. Ryan frowned. Nothing about this was funny, but it sounded like delirium. Janine fell silent and climbed back into the car. They drove on. The road stretched ahead and time dragged. Ryan's phone was still frozen. No signal. Glenn snored on. Janine was quiet, likely lying on the seat. Ryan's nerves tightened. He forced the car forward through the snowy waste. Eventually the road seemed to vanish under a crust of snow. To the right, something dark protruded, perhaps a structure. Had they arrived? Better to turn back and face Glenn's scolding than be lost here, Ryan thought. He stopped the car and tried to rouse his father. "Dad, wake up, we're stuck," he called firmly. Glenn didn't respond, nor did Janine. Desperate, Ryan tried starting the car again. No use. The dashboard flickered and died. "Damn it!" he cursed, jumping out into the twilight. The wind howled harder, the sky darkened. He opened the hood, but was clueless. Maybe he could call someone. He fumbled with his phone, yanking out the battery to reboot it. Nothing worked. "Glenn!" he yelled at his father. "Hand over your phone." Glenn slept on, oblivious. Ryan turned to Janine. Gone. The back seat was empty. Panic hammered in his chest as he stepped outside. Dusk thickened, the storm intensified. "Janine!" he shouted, voice lost in the wind. Far ahead on the snowfield he spotted a staggering figure. She gave no answer. Ryan stumbled after her, crashing through drifts. The car disappeared behind a swell of snow. "Janine, stop!" he cried desperately. She kept trudging toward that dark shape at the centre of the field. As he neared, Ryan realized it was a well shaft or some kind of ruined structure. He caught up, seizing her hood and trying to turn her around. "Where are you going? You'll freeze. What's wrong with—" He broke off, recoiling in horror. Her eyes were rolled back to show only whites, her mouth twisted in a ghastly grimace. She swayed, continuing toward the well as if hypnotized. Then something crawled out of the well's shadowed depths. An infant's body, blue with cold, black-haired, its head bent backward at a sickening angle, missing one leg. It moved awkwardly but swiftly, baring inhuman teeth in a silent snarl. A surge of rage and terror flooded Ryan. He shoved Janine aside, away from the monster. The infant hissed and lunged at him. Ryan fended it off with his hat, swinging desperately. Meanwhile, Janine crawled toward the well. Ryan tried to shout to distract the creature. The infant latched onto his hat, shrieking like a wounded beast. Its feral screams merged with the wail of the wind. For a moment, Ryan forgot Janine. When he looked back, her legs were already vanishing into the darkness. He screamed, "No!" But it was too late. The monstrous infant vanished in a swirl of snow, gone as if it had never been. Suddenly the blizzard died. Snow drifted down gently now. Ryan stood alone beside the empty well, calling into the void, tears freezing on his cheeks. Then he smelled smoke. Turning, he saw the distant glow of village lights on the edge of the field, warm windows beckoning. An old man hurried toward him, a living human figure. "Hey!" the old man shouted. "What are you yelling about?" Ryan, breathless, ran to him. "Help! A woman fell into a well. We have to get her out." The old man stared in bewilderment. "A well? Kid, there's no well here." Ryan turned. Nothing. No well, no car, no Janine, just a silent, snowy field. "Come on," the old man said gently but firmly. "We'll get you inside and warmed up. You don't belong out here." Ryan hardly resisted. He felt half mad. The old man guided him toward the village lights, mumbling about a long-ago story. How a man who once lived here drowned a child in a well and burned the house. A cursed place. Ryan stumbled along, muttering to himself. Night fell over the snowy plains. From under the snow, in the silent gloom, a female figure slowly emerged, head twisted backward, eyes empty. She watched the departing humans, then faded into the white emptiness. Glenn dreamed of a stormy winter's night in the woods, seeking shelter in a cave from certain death in the drifts. From deep inside, he heard Kenny's rasp. "Hand me the tinder box, we'll make a little fire." Glenn awoke in cold sweat. Dusk had settled outside. He glanced around. The car was half buried. Ryan and Janine were gone. Someone tapped on the window. Glenn turned and saw Kenny, alive, intact, wearing their father's old coat, a rifle slung over his shoulder. Glenn stumbled out, grabbing his brother's shoulders. "Kenny, how is this possible? You're dead! Where's Ryan? Where's Janine?" Kenny was silent for a long moment, then said quietly, "Come with me. We have to leave." They walked away from where the well had stood, heading back toward the highway. As they went, Kenny talked about the old legend of the drowned child. He admitted that once, drunk and lost, he'd found this place himself and released something dreadful that had been sealed inside. "What do we do now?" Glenn asked as they reached a familiar turn. Kenny frowned. "First we get back to the road while we still can, then we'll figure something out. Ryan's still alive, and Janine?" Glenn asked, voice trembling. Kenny did not answer. They kept moving, leaving behind white fields and dead silence. Deep in the darkness of that buried well, something purred, content. Above the distant village ringed by Minnesota's forests, the winter night closed in. Please write in the comments, support the video with a like, and of course subscribe to the channel. You can also share this video with your friends. They will probably also be interested.